In this video, I will show you 6 amazing ways to combine watercolor with acrylic markers. It's a wonderful way to up your watercolor techniques with a bit of mixed media leverage. Take your watercolor to the next level, especially if you are still struggling with watercolor control as a beginner. In a minute, I will demonstrate the 6 ways or points, if you will, of combining these two wonderful mediums together. And after, I will show you how you can use all of these techniques in one finished sketch. Hi, I'm Leila, a professional artist. Welcome to my art studio and my little helper here, studio helper, who is purring on my lap. Just a quick reminder that you can always subscribe to my channel. That way you can have it on demand and you can find me anytime you want to. Press the notification bell and that way you'll be notified every time I upload a new video. I promise I won't clog up your notification feed because I only create 2 full-length videos a month. So that way you can enjoy it a little bit at a time. The acrylic markers that I will be using in this video were sent to me by the Arrtx brand. It's a set of 90 colors. They did send me the set, but they did not sponsor the video in any way. I will also leave the unaffiliate links under the video. I will not be earning anything from those links, but they are there for you if you are curious to find out more about their products. Just opening this box, I'm already really liking the way the colors have been organized. I have opened few sets from different brands previously where the actual color layout made no sense whatsoever, and I had to spend quite a few hours just trying to figure out the best way to position them. Now in this set, all the colors seem to be organized in the row fashion. Same goes for the stickers. They also go in the same order. Again, it just makes it so much easier because you can get straight into swatching and drawing and painting with them. I will swatch them for you on white and black paper because they do tend to look different on different colors. They are lovely and opaque, and I have reviewed on my channel a smaller set. I have also tried it on different materials because the beauty of these markers is that they are not only perfect for drawings on paper, but they can go onto all sorts of surfaces, from plastic to pottery to anything else really. So make sure that you watch my other review. I will add all of those videos under the video in the video description, just in case if you are interested in using these on other surfaces. As you can see, these markers don't disappoint. They are very juicy. You don't need to shake them, you don't need to press on them. The paint or the ink, whatever you want to call it, just runs down through the nozzle and it just creates this really lovely layer. Okay, so you can see how nice and rich and juicy they are. The only color that I was a little bit disappointed with is this one here. It almost seems like the tip was a little bit dry. I wonder if I should just keep it sort of facing down for a little bit longer to help that, the juices to come down. But so far, I'm also quite impressed with the color selection. You know how normally I say, if there are lots of different colors, you've got a large set, you will have a lot of doubles and triples that are very, very similar, almost the same. Now with this set, I haven't seen anything that's like a total double. The only things that I think are quite close are these two, even though I sort of feel like this one's a little bit more opaque and this one's a little bit more transparent. But that's about it. Everything else has its own tone or has its own variation. I quite like the color selection here as well. I think one of my comments in some of the previous ones when I've swatched other sets is that there wasn't enough of the natural colors. So for example, if I wanted to do greens, I couldn't really, have natural colors, and as you see, it's really hard to mix, so you kind of had to layer or like dab little bits. And there are still some really strong greens here, but then there are a few really natural sort of shades, you know, semi-gray or a little bit kind of a swamp green color side. So lots of colors here for those of you that like to do portraiture, big variation of those light skin shades, dark skin shades. This is great. There's two metallic colors here as well. So metallic yellow, so kind of a golden, and metallic white, which is silvery. Also very, very beautiful colors. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to label them all with these stickers. And that way it will make it much easier for me to see which color I want to use. It probably wasn't as crucial with smaller sets that I've reviewed before, but this is such a large set. I really want to make sure that when I'm looking at the swatch, I know exactly the color I'm going for. So as you can see here, there are some little stickers here that should go on the backs of the markers, and these kind of stickers here that can go onto the swatches themselves. So now I will show you how you can enhance your watercolor painting with the introduction of acrylic markers. But before I show you a full step-by-step painting tutorial on how you can do that, I want to go over very quick little tips on what exactly happens when acrylic markers meet watercolor paint. So the first technique that I want to show you is it's almost like a common misconception. And the misconception is that acrylic markers are used as any normal marker. It's like a dry material. So you apply them and then you can layer them up. You can do all sorts of things with them. But there's one thing that I'm going to show you that will change your mind about how you can use them. And yes, this is not a traditional way that you can use your acrylic markers. Traditionally, you use them on dry paper and you layer colors up. You use a lot of similar shades to create lighter or darker colors and variations of the color. But if you are quick enough, you can dilute them with water. Once the acrylic marker is dry completely, it doesn't matter how much water you apply on top of it, it won't budge, I promise. But there is that little window. Of course, that window would depend on your humidity, on how hot your room is where you're working, and so on. Maybe even the type of paper you are using. But if you are quick enough and you work within maybe 1.5 minutes on average, you can get in there with your brush and your water and create really interesting effects. Again, depending on how long you left it, like you can see on my little sketch here, some of the blue is not dissolving. You can also apply a little bit of it and onto the wet paper as well, and that would create a different variation altogether. So don't be afraid to use a little bit of water with them. If you perhaps dip them into water, you might actually shorten the life of your markers. But if you are, using your common sense, you can really enhance your work without damaging your markers. So definitely something to try. So this is one of the very uncommon techniques that you can use when you are working with watercolor, because remember how here I've been using water, but you can just as easily add a little bit of watercolor to this and have them both running together. Now, when can something like this be useful? If, for example, you have a set of acrylic markers and you've got a big set, lots of colors there, but your watercolor set is quite small and you want to extend it by using acrylic markers, that's when using these techniques can be quite beneficial, because sometimes you just need a little bit of a different kind of a color in some areas where it can really bring things out. So that's when this kind of stuff works really well. And you can add a little bit of brown just into the watercolor itself to enhance it. Another good side of this is that it can give you much more of a control compared to, say, if you're a beginner at watercolor and you're just learning how to do things. Having something that's like this is very, very useful. The only downside to this is that you have to work fast. You have to work on small areas. You can't cover everything and then go in with water. It won't work. Okay, like you can even see here, these little lines there. It was only like maybe just a bit longer than 1.5 minutes, and you can see how it's going. So if you're trying to use this in your larger work, maybe, or even if you're doing some sketches on sketchbook, just try them out on that paper first to see how much time it gives you. Okay, so I hope you like this little one. I'm going to show you the next one. Now this next technique is also really cool, also not very well known. And this technique is perfect for when you're working on maybe some loose painting, watercolor painting, maybe if you're trying to create something semi-abstract and so on. If you are enjoying this channel and the videos that I upload over here, you might like to try out my Patreon page. You can choose the tier that suits you the most. Each tier offers special benefits, so you can watch more tutorials, win artworks, participate in suggesting new videos, and so many other things. So make sure to go over there, check it out, and remember, this is also a way that you can support this channel. I look forward to seeing you there. When we added water early on, it sort of ran in that technique number 1. Now, the tip or technique number 2 is if you draw a shape, any shape, and let it dry. Like, for example, I'll do something really abstract here. I'll just draw these circles, bubbles, or I don't know, anything. You know, it can be anything really. The main tip here is to leave this to completely dry. It has to be dry 100% before you go in with paint. Otherwise, you're going to get this effect. But I'm trying to show you something very, very different. When acrylic markers dry, they form almost like a border for water, because when they dry, they somewhat repel water. You can actually see it when you add them onto the damp paper, that they kind of almost push the water away, repel the water. When they dry, they still carry that property about them. So what you can do, create a reasonably wet color and add this in. And look what's happening. Even if I'm going over the edges, see here, it is trying to push them back in. See, it repels the paint, the water and the paint, of course, and it pushes it back in. You can even see a little ring forming around it. Now let's have a look. If we can create, what color should I use? I'll just use some purple. I'm just using some really random colors here, you guys, just to show you. So see, if I'm going over here, and even as I go over the line that I have sketched with the acrylic marker, it kind of makes the paint roll off it. The paint seems to move to one side or the other, but it doesn't seem to cross the border where the acrylic marker is drawn. You can almost see it sort of a bubbling just on the outside of the marker. Yeah, this can be really useful in some situations. Maybe if you like working on cards, or you like to create ambiguous shapes and have free-flowing watercolor, these kind of techniques can come in handy. Now, what could possibly be the downside of this technique? Well, anything you draw with acrylic marker is quite permanent. You can't, once it dries, you can't dilute it, you can't wash it away. It just stays there. Also, if you're applying too much water, if you're spraying lots of water over the top, and there's so much water that it actually creates a film, uniform film that goes over the things that you've sketched with the marker as well, then you just end up having a drawing underneath. But there's another technique that I'm going to show you next, which is also really interesting, and I don't see many people using that either. So I think hopefully you guys are learning lots of new things today. And let me know in the comments if you are. I'd really like to know if you use acrylic markers, and if you do you use them in this sort of a way? Now, this next technique is very exciting, and I think it's probably one of the most interesting techniques you can create with acrylic markers when you introduce them into watercolor painting. Now, for this technique, you want to use a lighter color of your acrylic marker versus the color of watercolor that you're going to be using on top. So remember, lighter colors and you drew them on first. So here I'm using white to sketch out some patterns, and then I'm using watercolor to layer it on top. The results are absolutely amazing. And now I'm just using one color, the cerulean blue chromium. And you can see that as this all dries, the areas where I've applied the white acrylic marker are coming through as these sort of really interesting and strange patches. It is very useful when you want to create that uneven look. Also, this technique is a little bit unpredictable as well, so it works really well with those paint guided paintings. And of course, as with anything else, you can always wait for this to dry and then you can grab a little bit more paint and get into more details. But make sure to wait for this whole area to dry before you make a judgment, because as it is drying and you can see more and more, these lighter areas just appear on their own. Word of warning though, with this technique, if you want to use it in your work, make sure that you test it out first. You test it out with the paper you want to use it with the paint you want to use it with. Different watercolor brands use different binders, so it might react a little bit differently. But you can see how interesting this is. And you saw how I've pretty much applied the paint everywhere. When it is drying, you can see how the white marker underneath, it's not standing out as a white marker. I don't see any marker lines, but it is pushing the paint away and it's creating these areas, which is perfect for things like this. You can always add a little bit more detail as you go along. Okay, so wet is this technique great for anytime you want to create a little bit of irregular layering. Now, you don't have to do it with white. You can do it with any of the lighter colors. The main thing is that the color you're applying underneath is quite a bit lighter than the color that you're applying on top. So if you want to create almost like a sunlit look, you know, when you've got a really bright sunny day and maybe you're working on I don't know, like you're painting a pot plant or something like this, you can use, instead of white, you can use bright yellow. So it will also move the paint away like this, but in a very natural and a very organic way, in a way that you kind of have very little control over. So it's a very interesting things. And I mean, with any of these techniques that I'm showing you right now, guys, really, your imagination is the limit there. I'm sort of showing you what you can do, but you each have your own way of working. You can introduce this into your own practice if you would like. Another thing to remember is don't make any judgments until all of it is dry, because when first you apply it, everything gets covered with the color that you've applied. It's while this color is drying that the acrylic markers kind of push it out of the way and some of these lighter areas come through. Okay, now I'm going to show you another technique that can be really, really useful, especially if you're one of those people that likes to create very quick sketches. Now, the main situation for this technique is that we are using all sorts of dark colors under the watercolor paint. You want to make sure that your markers are 100% dry before you start painting over the top. With this technique, you can go for small details, like here I want to do the person, just because I don't want to fiddle around with the watercolor brush. I also want to make sure in this situation that I position the person, because the person is the main subject, and then all the other things in the landscape will fall around my main subject. This technique is also great when you are working on the go. So maybe you want to sketch a few main things with markers that you take with you, for example, and then when you get back to your home or your studio where you're working from, you can use your watercolor to finish everything up. But this also gives you a chance to work over certain things without worrying about them smudging or running into each other and so on. Because acrylic markers repel watercolor a little bit when they are dry, I can go over with reasonably watery paint and not worry about it completely covering over and your details disappearing. I mean, it can be anything. You can create flowers, you can do anything. This is just a little demonstration just to sort of show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so I know this is still all wet, but just what, you know, I just want you to see how cool this combination can be. So here I have created something very detailed, and I've created it first thing. So normally when you work with watercolor, you would work on the background and everything, and then you put your figure in. Here I was able to completely reverse that style of painting, style of working, and I've created my details first, which was the person here. Again, could be anything really. And then once that is done, I can work with anything free-flowing around this detail without being worried that the paint is going to completely cover it up, or the paint is going to dilute it and wash it out. Of course, if you take a very, you know, strong bristle kind of a brush and start scrubbing everything, of course you will be able to probably remove some of this. But if you're using your common sense and you don't want to create that effect, then, you know, just make sure that you use a smooth brush and go over quite quickly. Make sure to leave it to dry as well before you start applying the watercolor. Again, there is no way that I would have been able to paint so freely on the background if I did paint the person in there first with watercolor. Everything would have been very, very tight and so on. Now, in this little thing, you know, this little demonstration, it doesn't really matter. But when you're working in your sketchbook, for example, and you've got something, you know, A5, A4 size even, it can actually create a lot of difference. Now this next technique, you guys, is probably something that you maybe would think of when you think of mixing acrylic markers and your watercolor. But the cool thing about this technique is that it gives you so much freedom, and it gives you a freedom to go back in and correct any mistakes that you possibly have made with watercolor, and eventually save a painting that you maybe were thinking of throwing away. So this technique starts with your regular watercolor application. You paint your painting like you normally would, without any worries. Loose watercolor, intense watercolor, it all just depends on your subject. The important thing is that you wait for the watercolor to perfectly dry before you go into it with acrylic markers. The beauty of this technique is that you can use any colors to go over anything. So if you've forgotten to put in any highlights, you can use a white acrylic marker. If you've forgotten to reserve some areas and would like to make them lighter, you can use that color that you actually want on your painting and just draw over it. Maybe these are some little details and it's really hard to reserve them, for example with masking fluid, and you're just a beginner, so you still find it a little bit hard to go around certain areas and leave them white paper. These are the perfect way to bring in all of these little complicated areas. You can use anything, absolutely any color. You can see how this technique is very simple, and this technique might not necessarily be a technique that you are planning to do when you're starting to do a work, but at any time, if you have realized that you've forgotten something or you want to add something else, but it's too late because you saw how dark the tree was there, how else are you going to add the snow on top of the branches? Well, of course you can get your paints, you know, for example, acrylic paint, and start working with that. But these are just very, very convenient, very quick. You just open it up like a pen. You've got really good control over them. So they're perfect for little things like that. And now this last little thing that I want to talk about, it not necessarily even have to do with the watercolor paint, but more to do with the acrylic markers themselves. And it's the fact that no matter what color of paper you use, you can achieve a really, really strong, vibrant results by layering these colors themselves. So for example, if I grab this green here and this other green here, see, by layering them together, they sort of come through and they create this other color. So if you want to create a very intense color, like maybe you're working on black, like here on my swatch book, for example, you can see that it's a little bit transparent. But if you go over it again and again, like I'll just do this here, you can achieve a really strong white. For example, if it's white, you can do the same with all the other colors. So my point is, don't be afraid to layer them up. So here I've got these colors, so now I'm going to use the skin tone, and you can see how on paper, on white paper, it looks one way, over the light green different way, and this one in a different way. But if we wait for it to perfectly dry and we overlap again that same color, like this one here, right, you can see how opaque we can build it up. So if you are, for example, in a situation where you're doing that last sketch that I showed you with the tree, if it's not enough, you can always layer it up, and you can put another color underneath, so when it does come through, it will affect how your last color appears. Like here, for example, you see it's this color here, when it's over the green, it appears like that. So remember that this is also part of you using this material as well. The same thing would happen if you're sketching over watercolor or any other medium. Okay, now what I'm going to do next is I'm going to show you how to use these techniques in the work where it's more of a finished work, it's more of a composition rather than these little tests. But before I do this, let's just very quickly go over this again. So remember, you can use them with water, mix them with watercolor to create certain looks, certain areas. You can use acrylic markers to create borders and stop the paint from running over. For this, you need it to be completely dry, whereas here you need to work very fast. You can apply lighter colors underneath and then a darker watercolor color over the top. And here I did a little test here off camera, so just to show you, see, this is what it looks like when you use yellow versus white, for example. So you can create, these really interesting situations where the light almost shines from underneath the color that you apply on top with watercolor. Just remember, you are using your watercolor over the dry acrylic markers. This one here is good for if you need to very quickly sketch some small things in your landscape and you want to start with them for some reason rather than do them at the end of your painting. And here you can create, like I did here, a little figure in the landscape. You can do anything like this, and then you can still use free-flowing paint if you want to. Main thing here, remember that this is dry. And this little technique is where you can paint whatever you want, but then if you've forgotten to reserve areas, if you forgotten to create lighter variations like I did here with the snow, you can always just wait for watercolor to be dry. Remember, it has to be 100% dry, and then add whatever you want on top with the markers. You can also use darker colors as well if you need to. But most of the time with watercolor, it's the things that we forgot to reserve, we forgot to leave that lighter, that usually, eat us up, so to speak. And here, just a little reminder that you can actually layer them up and that the color underneath will be affecting your final result of how you see this color as well. Okay, so now let's get on to the actual painting, and I will be able to show you what you can actually do to take your watercolor to the next level. So the first thing, as always, I like to apply a little bit of masking tape. That's if I want to keep my edges quite nice and clean. Many of you ask about the tape. It's a soft tack washi tape that I get from my local art store. And unfortunately, it only comes in one color. I would have preferred to have it in white, but purple is all I get. It's a more or less complicated image. I'd like to do a preliminary sketch. This is not very complicated, so I'm just putting few lines to highlight certain areas and help me out with the composition when I start working with color. The first thing I'm going to do is the technique that I showed you as a technique number 3, where I've applied lighter color underneath the paint. Because this is a seascape snapshot of the seawater, I'm going to apply the white marker in the areas where I want to create that change of color in the water, because as you know, there'll be waves, and waves do create that change in depth of color. Now I'm going to leave that to dry, and I'm going to start working from the top down. Next move is your classical watercolor move. So it's a very traditional way of using watercolor, damping the paper first, the area I'm going to work on, and then applying a reasonably diluted color. So the sky here merges into water with a little bit of the background blurring into the sky with that soft blue. And you can already see how the white acrylic marker is working for me here, where it is creating these layers that I don't need to worry about. I can just focus on the colors that I'm going to use with watercolor. Those lighter areas are already created for me when I'm using the white acrylic marker. It's hard to create this kind of result with, for example, a masking fluid, or even when you paint with white gouache or acrylic over the top. Again, it doesn't give you that sort of a very fluid kind of introduction of the lighter layer. Okay, now this area is still quite damp, so I'm going to leave that to dry because I want to add other things in there. But while that is drying, I'm going to work on these rocks on the mid and foreground. And I'm going to use this technique here, where I have applied the acrylic marker before I've applied the paint. What this will help me create in this artwork is make the rocks quite a bit heavier than water and create that very rocky, very dense texture, because I want to have them quite forthcoming in this artwork. I'm not going to paint over the rocks completely just now, so I'm just going to use the markers to cover some areas of intense color. You can see how it's also helping me create that sort of a rough rock-like texture. By the way, if you like the technique number 1, where you work very quickly and add some water, this is the time where you can add a little bit of water and make the actual acrylic marker run. I don't want to do it here because I want to keep these areas quite strong because of that rocky texture that I want to apply. But if you want to smooth anything, you can do that. This is a good time to do that now. Okay, now let's move on to marking the water up here at the front. Again, a reasonably diluted color, and I'm going to go in with quite a bit of water first, adding a little bit of blue. Now remember, underneath there I have the white marker. Now here is a different mix of blue with a little bit of green. And now I'm going to use similar color just to highlight some of the waves on the back as well. And you see now I can already play with the lighter areas that were created by the acrylic marker that went on first on the paper. So that way it's kind of like the composition comes out to you on its own without you actually having to plan it too hard. You see, the beauty of having these rocks here marked up is that now I can see the values that I'm going to work with, and I don't need to worry. I can paint over them with other colors. That's not going to change much at all. And so that way you kind of are freeing yourself up, and you can really focus on the important watercolor things like merging colors together and layering them up and so on, knowing that all of those things that you have created before, like those lighter areas with the direction of the water, or some of the rock areas, they will stay put. Nothing will change that anymore. If you're one of those people that loves to create blooms or anything like this, but worried that other things are going to be hidden and you're going to paint over things and it makes you really tighten up in your watercolor, even though you want to create something loose, then this is a technique for you, mixing the acrylic markers with your watercolor, because it allows you to work with very definite subjects, but at the same time enjoy that fluidity of watercolor. And another thing that it's doing here is it's creating that heaviness that is a little bit hard to create with watercolor alone unless you're prepared to use it in a reasonably thick manner. So this kind of mixed media technique can really highlight that difference between the fluid and the really sort of solid, harsh form, like in this artwork, for instance. My cat is supervising the work like he always does. At this stage again, I'm going to leave it all to dry because I need a dry surface to show you how I'm going to employ this next technique, which is this one here. Now I'm going to use white, but instead of using it underneath the watercolor, I'm going to use it over the top to create these really strong little splashes of water that creating foam and all sorts of different things. So you see how here I have got a really soft pale blue, but I want to create a little bit more of the spray over the rocks and when I come closer to the shore. So I'm going to start, but rather than see with rocks, I was using marks that were going up and down, maybe a little bit of spots. Here I'm going to use a little bit more of the chaotic line, and only in the areas of the strongest highlight, because I can't go any whiter than what I'm going to do with this acrylic marker. Use your mark making to really create the texture that you want. Bubble up that water, create little sprays, do all sorts of things that you find that you need to finish everything off. And now I just want to pay a little bit more attention to this last little tip that I gave you. This is something that I want you to keep in mind. Now, while using colors like really intense black, for example, here, it doesn't really matter that much what I applied over, but when it comes to white, for example, or any other light colors, maybe using light blue or cream colors, you might want to apply 2 or 3 layers on the areas where you want it to be super bright. So see, I'm putting in a second layer and it's already so much brighter. I'm not going to go over everything like this because again, I don't want to flatten everything. You can even do a 3rd layer, but make sure that all the layers are dry in between if you want to create that look. Here we can just emphasize a little bit on that runoff, that happens when the water comes onto the rocks and then washes down. And anywhere where you want to emphasize that whiteness, you just go over it again. I would not suggest, as I said before, going over everything because some things, you don't want them to be so eye-catching. By the way, see all these previous lines that I've created here before I've even painted? See how softly they are standing out from underneath the water area and some areas here as well. Now that is helping me to create that really sort of that movement that you get in the water. And rather than me having to worry to always clean it up or go in with a brush and reabsorb the paint to leave these areas light, I could just without any worry slap any color over the top because I know that these lines will appear a little bit lighter. And now when it comes to the really strong highlights, I can always just do them on top with the acrylic marker. Okay, now let's have a look at the pretty much completed composition. At this stage, if your marker is dry, you can always go back in and add more layers of watercolor over the top if you feel that you want to add more shadows or variations of color. You can also use your markers to deepen some of the areas. Now, because on this composition, I pretty much have painted water with watercolor and the rocks with the acrylic marker, a little bit of both, of course, and in both of those subjects. But remember, you can layer them up in any way that you like using these techniques that I showed you here as a guideline. But before we remove the masking tape, I want to grab a tiny little brush, this little liner here, and I want to just add few more details in the water. You can always do this with the acrylic markers as well, maybe underneath the waves, because foam casts quite a bit of shadow onto the water as well. Value-wise, I want to almost merge this water here with the rocks. And you see here, we're pretty much using a little bit of this technique where we're using the way the acrylic marker repels water when it is dry. So here I have white little sort of fluffed up water bits, and I can go over like this and not worry about the white completely disappearing as well. So that way I can, you know, really emphasize those shadows underneath the white little foam bits. And it's the light and the dark areas that show the direction of the water. If you want me to do a full step-by-step painting tutorial on how to paint seawater and stuff like this, where I explain everything in detail, let me know and I can do that as well. Shall we add something little? I always like to add a little bit of life into the sketches, even though I know these are not proper full-on paintings. These are just little studies and things. We can add a little boat, or maybe we can add little birds. What do you guys think? Shall we do that? And maybe another one here so that they're kind of flying in like that to really, you know, frame the whole composition. There we go. So now we've got that sort of a lovely S-shaped viewfinder. you know that situation when you can put objects in a certain way to lead the gaze of the viewer onto the painting, so in a certain way. So it's sort of like, that's what I call them, a viewfinder. So it sort of goes like this, or it goes like that, whichever way guides your viewpoint. Okay, now let's remove the masking tape. Actually, just before I finish, you know how there's a lot of sort of a pinks in the sky and a little bit in the water that, you know, of course you'd have the sky reflected in the water. But I just want to bring a little bit more of that pink into the rocks, just a tiny little bit. And it's not so much of a pink, it's more of an orangey kind of a pink. So just in some areas, and this is the cool thing about doing this mixed media, I can do this now really easily, even if the painting is pretty much finished, and just add tiny little, just spots here and there, to bring in a little bit more of that redness into there. Not very strongly, but just to get this warmth. Also creates a really interesting combination with the bluey greens that are the main colors for the water. So they're not exactly the opposite on the color wheel, but you know, they're within that range of complementaries, especially those areas that catch quite a bit of light. And you see how it's not very visible, but it does sort of give that warmth to the what you normally think as a very cool waterscape, seascape. And one last thing, I promise this is the last thing. I want to add a white bird there. I just felt like it just needed a little bit more eeriness, you guys. Okay, you guys, now for those of you that have been watching this video or the review of the markers, as you can see, they're very good in terms of opaqueness. You can see how well they go over the black. And this is just one layer, except for this I did 2 layers here. Big variety of colors. This is not the first set of Arrtx acrylic markers that I'm reviewing. I have other videos where I've reviewed other sets. I find that even though there are some staple colors, like for example this red, you know, there's this blue, that stay the same, the other colors are quite different. So even the variations of gray are different. The metallics were different in the previous set that I reviewed. So it's actually really interesting how, rather than just using that one set and adding extra colors to it, they are actually different colors altogether. And again, I really like the way there are so many more neutral greens and grays in this set. In my opinion, whether you are looking for acrylic markers just to work with on their own, or whether you are looking for something to do like a mixed media project, maybe you're not a watercolor painter, maybe you're an acrylic painter, or you know, whatever it is you're into, I think they would probably be quite a good addition. But as always, you guys, always check the price check what you have in your art stores and compare, because sometimes things can seem cheaper, but once you've put the postage in, you include other, you know, shipment and handling and all that sort of stuff, things sometimes not as cheap as you think they are. So always check for yourself, because we all live in different parts of the world. So yeah, the only thing that I think that I thought was a little bit weird is that you know how they have these little stickers over here? I think these stickers are closer to the true color of the actual ink in them. So like here you can see this is number 40, so this is the 40, so you can see this color is quite close, the sticker is quite close, but this sticker here is quite different. So same with this last one as well. I'll show you this number 50. Now this sticker is quite dark here, you can see, and the sticker here is quite dark. It's almost like a blackish kind of brown. So if you go by these markers, the actual color here is very close to the actual paint in these. So yeah, so I guess looking at the cap and the little back of the marker itself is quite a good indicator. Like for example, these two colors as well, very similar. So 24A and 24C, so they're very similar. The only difference is that this color is just a little bit more vibrant, whereas this color has a little bit more gray added. What you see here is that the cap colors really do reference that difference, whereas the sticker colors not so much. So they're almost the same, and here they appear full on red. So again, just when you're choosing a color, make sure that you look at the cap and the back of these markers. And I will link other videos that I've done with, you know, Arrtx markers, acrylic markers before, because I've tried them on different surfaces. I did videos where I compared them with other kind of markers. So if you are really interested in the set, watch those other videos as well, even though it's a different set, but it's the same brand. And I find that the quality is very consistent throughout all the sets. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. I hope you got quite a bit out of, you know, these. I know these look really funny, but this is not meant to be any kind of artwork. This is just meant to be a little squiggle to show you the actual techniques. So I hope you guys got a lot out of this, and I hope you feel more open to using things like acrylic markers in your watercolor art, because it's not many people sort of tend to do this unless they are specifically mixed media focused. But anyway, let me know how you go in the comments. And I would like to say a big thank you to my wonderful patrons that are supporting this channel. And those of you guys who want to see more videos, who might like to request certain things, please go over there and get in touch with me through Patreon. And I look forward to seeing you guys all in the next video. Have a lovely day, and thanks so much for hanging out with me and testing things out. And have fun painting.